What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you the Companions from Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous, Ranked. A revisit to a much older video I did back in the day that covered pretty much just the base companions for the game, and seeing how these days we had one added by DLC, and realistically I think it would be fair to add some of the ones added by various mythic paths. It felt like an appropriate time to go back and take a look at this and talk about which ones are my favorites and how some of that has changed a little bit over the last 3 years. So hopefully you'll find some enjoyment in it, but with no further ado, let's dive into this thing. So at the very bottom of the list we have Trever. Trever is a somewhat hidden companion as he is Sosiel's brother and can be recruited as part of Sosiel's companion quests basically. If you make the right choices, it's possible to recruit him. But the reason that he's at the bottom is because A, being recruited pretty late into the game, he doesn't have much to add to basically any situation, and even if he did, you'd probably never take him with you because his build is horrendous. Trever had a very rough life, let's say. He didn't find himself in the depths of the abyss because things were going well, and his build, I imagine, is meant to reflect that. But it's a mess. You recruit him so late into the game that a lot of his build is set into stone as well, so you can't even try to multi-class your way out of it like you can with some of the other companions. It's just a bad time all around. Now, just a little bit up from him is Staunton Vane, which is our first Lich Companion. So if you're unaware, the Lich Mythic Path is able to resurrect 5 different potential companions for your party that are only available to that Mythic Path. Now, broadly speaking, as far as companions go, I would say pretty much all of them are underwhelming. However, realistically, the Lich Mythic Path and thus its companions isn't really so much about the individual companions and the quality of that. It's more about the fantasy of being a Lich and raising these people from the dead to serve as your grave guards. And that collective idea is stronger than any one of these individual Lich companions. But at the bottom, we have Staunton. Staunton is a pretty tragic figure, I would say, that is responsible for the fall of Dresden, which was done at the hands of Menago, a Lilitu demon who kind of coaxed him into it. But while his story and subsequent raising into undeath is pretty fitting, his build is also pretty terrible, and unfortunately he doesn't have a lot of reactivity either, so you can resurrect him and then take him to go fight Menago, the woman who effectively did this to him, and he has nothing to say about it, and that's disappointing more so than his build, really. Just above him, however, we then have Kestoglir, one of your other potential Lich companions, and while this guy's build is better, he just has nothing going on otherwise. You can meet him in Act 4, and to be honest, it felt like he was there mostly just to fill out the roster of the Lich companions in case you want to go fully undead party. And really the only saving grace and why he's slightly above Staunton is simply the fact that his build is actually pretty flexible in comparison to most of the others, as he's just a straight fighter, and thus through feats and things like that you can customize him to be what you want a fair bit, which can't really be said for a lot of others. But then we have Delamere, one of the early potential Lich companions, as you can find her right in Act 3 when you become a Lich, and then get the ability to actually raise grave guards. Delamere can be found in a temple, and she used to be a valiant crusader, specifically a archer of sorts, who served Erastil, and you can raise her into undeath, thus defiling her remains, and she hates you for it, but is nonetheless compelled to serve. But she's got a straight Slayer build, which is fantastic as far as melee DPS goes, and I like the idea of corrupting a follower of a god like Erastil in the name of the Lich Companion, so I think that part feels pretty good for what it is. But then we have the 2 better Lich Companions, and if you couldn't tell, they're all ranked pretty low purely because they don't have a lot of interactions, and they're mostly there just to fulfill that fantasy. But the second best of those is, I believe it's Char or CR, I don't know exactly how to pronounce this dude's name, but I would say he's the best of these because A, he's actually a little difficult to recruit, period, as you have to do a side quest for him in a very particular way involving his son's death, and how you are somewhat responsible for it, or at least the one who had to strike the killing blow to a person gone mad, and then you have to take credit for that in basically the most evil way possible before it's even possible to recruit this guy, so he's very easily missed even if you go full on Lich. But realistically, just the act of recruiting him and the hoops you have to jump through to do that are fantastically evil. You can just destroy this dude's entire life and then raise him to serve you in undeath to ruin that part too. It's deeply messed up, and because of that I think it fits the Lich very, very well. but also he happens to be a cavalier, which means he comes with a mount. And given that you don't get any cavalier companions at all, other than this guy, which is only available in this mythic path, and the fact that cavalier is really strong in mounted combat, he feels unique to play as far as these characters go, which puts him, I think, a cut above most of the other Lich Companions, which means the very last one that we have to talk about is the Lich version of Queen Galfrey. So, light spoilers here, I imagine, but is what it is, I suppose. Basically, if you're following a path that ultimately sees Queen Galfrey dead, and you happen to be playing as a Lich, you can have her resurrected and forced to serve you in undeath. And while you might think that a paladin of Iomedae would be especially hateful about this situation, she isn't really. You can have an incredible conversation with her about this and how she doesn't actually feel as bad as you might think. In a lot of ways, she just feels relieved of the burden of carrying an entire nation on her shoulders and the responsibility of getting something like the World Wound properly closed. And what's more, she also goes on to say herself that if anything, her being raised like this proved Iomedae really didn't care about her at all, as she would have stepped in and prevented it from happening otherwise. So now that she can focus purely on killing demons and nothing else, it lifted a certain weight off of her shoulders, even in death, which is honestly a bit harrowing as far as some of these conversations go. And because of that, I think the Lich version of Galfrey is a really great narrative moment. If anything, I wish it would have just happened a little sooner so you could have some of those conversations, because this is towards the end of the game, which is a very similar situation for our next one, which is just regular old Queen Galfrey. She is available as a companion for essentially the last dungeon, if, and only if, you manage to successfully romance her, which is possible over the course of the game with Angel or Aeon pretty much. And then I think late game you can actually switch over to Legend or Gold Dragon, but basically as long as you play a good aligned character, you can make this happen. And if that romance is successful, she'll join you for the last one. She's a level 20 paladin. Paladins are, for the most part, pretty great in this adventure path because we're only fighting demons, like 90% of the time. And realistically, my only gripe about this is just that you have no time to do anything with this character, and while it can feel like a decent enough conclusion to that romance line, it offers nothing else. But now we get into what I would consider the sort of core cast of companions. These ones are more involved, they have more dialogue, they're with you for longer, and they're more interactive. So while a lot of the other companions we just went over are more gimmicks than anything else, these ones tend to be much more fleshed out. And at the very bottom of that list, we have Lann. Now, Lann and Wenduag are some of the first characters you'll meet, and for some reason, Lann is incredibly annoying to me, and he just never quite made up for it. And it's not helped by the fact that you have to choose him or Wenduag for the bulk of the game. It is possible to recruit both of them later, but it takes some work. And honestly, Wenduag is just a much more interesting companion, even if she's evil. Lann, on the other hand, is your more standard do-good type that is honestly a bit naive. In the future, he thinks he can carve out for the mongrels, and he's a character that just never quite landed right for me, so I can see why people enjoy him, but I'm simply not a huge fan. Worth a mention, though, that his default build is actually pretty good. Just above him, however, we then have Greybor, and much as his name would imply, the guy is a bore. A real personality vacuum, to be honest. I think his companion quest really hard carries a lot of what he has going on. He has some interesting stuff in the Abyss section of the game, and then his final quest can play out in a few different ways, potentially leading to a betrayal, assuming you even got him recruited properly in the first place, as he is a hired assassin after all, and you have to pay up. And his quest is really interesting, even if him as a person, not so much. But he is also a Slayer, which again is just a fun class I enjoy playing, so everything besides his personality isn't so bad. Now just above him we have Sosiel. Sosiel is appointed as an advisor to you right at the start of Act 2, and he is a cleric, which is desperately needed for your party at that point in time. And as a full divine caster, clerics can do a great many things for you, which means just from a class standpoint, he's a great addition. But personality-wise, leaves a little bit to be desired. Now, he does have a fair bit of content. He is a cleric of Shaylin, to be specific, and she's the deity of art, beauty, love, things like that. And Sosiel is struggling with those things a bit. He goes to a funeral of his friends only to see them be desecrated by a necromancer. He finds out that his brother faltered in the face of the crusades against the demons, and you have to deal with that as well. So he's got a lot of very interesting quests, even if he as a person can be a little bit boring, but a bit of a sensitive soul, if anything. Now, just above him, we have a slightly more interesting companion, but admittedly kind of like a half companion, and that is Finnean the Talking Weapon. As part of Woljiff's recruitment quest, you can find Finnean in a shop and pick him up and take him with you. As the name would imply, he is a weapon that can transform into basically any weapon you have proficiency with, which means that he can fill the gaps for whatever weird weapon your specific build might require. In fact, in many cases, because of his upgrade path that happens over the course of the game, he might very well be the best option for you. But definitely so if you need something weird like an S-stock or a dueling sword, more than likely. But the interesting thing about Finnean isn't so much his useful role in the party, but rather what he is. He's a living weapon. How did that happen? Where did that come from? What would he like to do about it? Because he seems oblivious to the fact that he is a weapon. And there's this whole little interesting side plot that centers around that and how he came to be. And it's a really fun little narrative, even if he himself kind of lacks a, let's say, corporeal form outside of a sword. Roughly halfway through, though, we then have Daeran. Now, Daeran is simultaneously very interesting and very, very annoying. Now, he is kind of your sort of anti-hero type. He's a very off-putting individual, somewhat by design when you get into his personal quest. And more often than not, he's just very grating on a person. But his quest is super cool. He's an oracle. It turns out that he made a deal of some kind with something called the Outsider. And there's a pretty cool quest involved in that also has a bunch of different endings depending on how much respect or rapport you've managed to build up with the guy, which in my case is a challenge to do because I find him so grating. And I kind of find that interplay interesting, even if his character isn't exactly my taste. But then we have Regill, our resident gnome Hell Knight, who simply by being a Hell Knight is hastening his own death as a gnome because they are subject to what is called the bleaching, which means if they don't subject themselves to chaotic lives, they die a lot faster. But that's how much being lawful means to Regill, which is obviously a very defining character trait, so much so in the fact that he doesn't even really have a personal quest. His quests are more about testing you as a commander and setting up the Hell Knights to properly work with you. So that, combined with his heavy involvement in the actual crusade side of things and like councils and whatnot, he's a very interesting companion from that standpoint, and he grows on you after a while, especially if you're not playing a mythic path that is directly opposed to the guy. But what's more, his build is actually, I believe, the only one that uses a prestige class by default, which is the Hell Knight, which makes him interesting as well, and even his default build is pretty solid. So I like having him around for a few different reasons, but these other ones a little more so. Next up we have Woljiff. Woljiff is another one of the first companions you'll pick up. You have to spring him from prison, only for him to turn around and ask you for help in dealing with a problem with his little thieves guild, where it turns out he absolutely did the thing they're accusing him of doing, but, you know, of course we're lying about it. So Woljiff is a rapscallion, a scoundrel, an eldritch scoundrel to be specific, and that can be fun. And what's more, he's one of the companions that can actually be good or evil at the end of it. You have a lot of influence over his character and his questline. His questline itself is really interesting, as he has some sort of bizarre heritage as a tiefling that sees his shadow doing more than a shadow should, let's say, which is also really cool. My only gripe about Woljiff is that he never really aspires to more that isn't just easily handed to him, even if you sort of push him in that route. He's got a very set in stone way of looking at the world that, while, you know, you can keep him from cavorting with demons, is not something that feels like it really changes, and I guess that's what I don't care too much for about when it comes to Woljiff. He does have a potentially very good build via Eldritch Scoundrel, which is a fun one to mess around with, so there is that. Now right above him we have Ulbrig. Ulbrig is the DLC companion. He was added by the last Sarkorians, and he has a fantastic build with his Griffin Heart Shifter, which is only available to him, which makes him quite unique in that regard. And his Griffin form has unique abilities that nobody else else can really do, which obviously brings unique things to the battlefield and makes playing him pretty much always worth your time. He himself, however, was trapped in stone for a long while and is the last Sarkorians, as it were, because he is from Old Sarkoris, which is what the land of the World Wound was before it was torn to pieces and named the World Wound as a rift into the Abyss. So he's really interesting from that perspective because he has a lot to add from those things, and then learning about his backstory, about why he was trapped as a statue for so long, what happened to him before that, where his memories went, is all really fun. And because he's a DLC companion, that's coupled with a lot more new content than basically any other companion gets, as his companion quests tend to lead to other more involved side quests at the same time over the course of the game, which is also pretty cool. But then we have Arueshalae, an anime character as far as I'm concerned, but honestly a pretty cool one. So Arueshalae is a succubus who would like to revert back to being mortal more or less, and is trying to redeem herself, which is a theme of this game in more ways than you might initially realize. But Arueshalae had a brush with the goddess Desna, the goddess of dreams, and they made a sort of pact where Desna is very much so trying to allow Arueshalae the room she needs to truly redeem herself in a sort of reverse fallen angel situation, because while fallen angels are a very common trope, the reverse, in a sort of cosmic sense, should definitely be possible, but rarely happens, and so getting that perspective from this character is also great. But because she's a succubus, her stats are also insane, which is unfortunate then that her build is an espionage expert, which kinda sucks. The fact that she's not a demon slayer is blasphemy. But also, if you romance her, she has a quest where she literally puts herself in horny jail, which is beyond funny to me. Now, just above her, we have Seelah. Seelah is the iconic character for this Pathfinder adventure, which means that she is a class representative of paladins. Every class has an iconic, as they're called in the Pathfinder world, and Seelah is this one, so she's like a very specific character in the Pathfinder lore. As such, she is our paladin, of course, and paladins are pretty good in this setting by default, just because of what they are, and her quest is a little more traditional. However, to add some conflict to it, in this particular setting, paladins are lawful good, or at least in this version of the game, I should say. With that in mind, Seelah verges a bit more on the side of good than lawful. If anything, she's a little prone to chaotic choices, which is a bit of an odd touch, and it creates some tension here and there in her quests and about her faith and what she believes in that makes her a little more interesting than I would say most others. And honestly, just the fact that she is a fully fleshed out character before being brought to this game shows, as she has a bit more of a defined personality than a lot of the others can. However, with that in mind, my gripe about Seelah is more that she's just a little unreactive to a lot of things, and while she can leave your party eventually, it takes a very long time to get there that I don't think would be acceptable for an actual paladin, which can be a little frustrating at times. Now, bringing it up to the top 5, we then have Nenio. Nenio would be higher if her quest wasn't awful. It's my least favorite quest in the game because it is a puzzle dungeon, and I've done it like once or twice, and I hate it so much. But I do love her as a character. Initially, I found her really grating, but Nenio, over the course of the game, I would say has some of the funniest lines, for reasons that are explained in her quest, if you can be bothered to do it. She has a very, let's say, poor amount of socialization, asking all sorts of just wildly inappropriate questions, and to anyone at any time, including demon lords and whatnot, and it's just very funny. Couple that with the fact that she is a scroll savant wizard, specializing in illusion magic, and you can do a lot of fun stuff with that. I made a build specifically for Nenio, which just instantly kills stuff, including a bunch of bosses with things like Phantasmal Killer or Weird, and it's a ton of fun. So she's funny, I really enjoy the build that I can put on her, I use it pretty much every run at this point. I just wish her quest was a little better. But that brings us to number 4, which is Camellia. Camellia is not so subtly an evil character. It's hinted at pretty much from the moment you meet her, before being outright explained in Act 3. So, slight spoilers ahead for her personal quest. Camellia here is a serial killer. She is just murdering people for the love of the game. She has an amulet to hide her alignment, which is chaotic evil, and she belongs in the Abyss more than just about anybody else you meet. And her quests, as a result of that, are wild, honestly. It is some truly messed up stuff at times, but honestly, I think you need that in a game where you're talking about how depraved demons are supposed to be, but also people that, wind up there. How do they get to that point? She's a perfect example of that. From her upbringing to where she is now, she's a irredeemably evil person, and the game really leans into that. So much so that having her around on anything but an evil playthrough seems ridiculous, which is a bummer because she's one of the best lockpickers you can get. But what I don't like about her, and why she wouldn't be a little farther up, is simply that the game really jumps through hoops to keep you from killing her. And that's probably because she has some really good quests, but it's to the point where it doesn't even make sense. Like, as an angel or an Aeon who's all about law, you can totally just overlook everything she's doing and be like, that's fine. And there's essentially no consequences for doing so, which is just bizarre to me. But then we crack the top 3 first with Wenduag. Lann's counterpart and much more interesting character. We have everybody's favorite cat spider, who is all about survival and trying to raise her people to be more than, simple mutated creatures living in the dark. Now, to do this, she's willing to do basically anything, including serving demons or whoever's stronger, frankly, until she can learn to take that power for herself. Definitely an evil companion, but between her quests as well as her overall narrative arc, especially if you choose to romance her, she's a tremendous character and has, I think, one of the best progressions over the course of the game, from where she starts to where she goes and where she wants to be. And it's cool to see that play out, especially when it gets down to her actual emotions. And her build can be taken in a lot of ways, as she just has a level 1 fighter thing you gotta play around with, and other than that, you're pretty much good to go, so there's a lot you can do with her. But she defaults to an archer. Second on the list, we then have Aivu, the Havoc Dragon from the Azada Mythic Path that you can get, and Aivu is a wonderful character. A child dragon, enhanced by your mythic powers to grow bigger beyond what she would normally be. She's a great bit of, I would say, comic relief at times, always eating everything and getting into it. And when she gets kidnapped in Act 4 as part of that mythic path, there's a tremendous fight that you can go deal with in a slave market for the Abyss that really exemplifies the difference between chaotic evil and chaotic good when it comes to concepts like freedom. And Aivu's always at the center of that, but also she's just an incredibly strong companion. As a Havoc Dragon, she's got a Fear aura that you can toggle on. Once you get a few mythic paths under your belt, she has not only a breath weapon that keeps getting stronger, but also like almost an entire list of cleric spells she can drop, like Resurrection, for instance, which makes her a tremendous party member that doesn't even count against your party limit, which is a huge blast to play around with. But also, she's a dragon, so that's something. But then we have number 1. And to explain why Ember is my number 1 character, we have to talk a little bit about things that are also some light spoilers. But basically, Ember is an elf that was burned at the stake, but, managed to be not killed by this. She was kind of freed during the middle of it, so while horribly burned, she's okay. And she wanders the streets as a beggar, basically convincing people that the only people they really need to believe in is themselves more so than gods. And if you embrace that and you push her to keep doing it, she can convince even Nocticula to change her ways, which is a really fantastic story. But, and what people may not be aware of, is the fact that that's actually a reference to the real adventure path. You see, if you fully do Ember's quest, Nocticula, one of the demon lords, will fully repent and rise to godhood as the Redeemer Queen, which was something that was kind of already in progress and is the canonical outcome for her in the adventure path as part of her cult of the Redeemer Queen. And Ember is a single character that sort of represents that change, but also, as such, is one of the characters that really exemplifies the concepts of redemption across this entire narrative arc. And while that's really fun, it also helps that her Blaster Caster build, that her default build sets up, is outrageously strong if you pour some items on top of it that increase things like fire damage, as well as also setting her up to be your healer, so she can perform both a healer and blaster caster role, which makes her an extremely valuable party member. In fact, on my original Iron Man playthrough of the game, I used her to one-shot a boss for like 1400 damage, I think it was. It was a really fantastic critical moment on stream, just to drive home how powerful she can be with her default build. But a great build, a great character, and a great story is easily why Ember reigns supreme here for me. But that is pretty much going to do it for all of these ranked. I certainly hope you enjoyed the video. I'm sure you'll disagree with me about something, so do let me know how you feel about all these down in the comment section below, which naturally means to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.